The massive chamber stretched out like a small city. Captain Jake Morrison had never seen anything like it in his 43 years. The walls curved up so high that clouds actually formed near the ceiling. Thousands of different alien beings filled the floating platforms that served as seats. Some looked like walking trees, others like living crystals, and some were just clouds of colorful gas held together by force fields. Jake stood on the small platform reserved for Earth's delegation. His uniform felt too tight under all those alien eyes watching him. Next to him, Dr. Lisa Grant checked her datapad one more time. She had been working on this presentation for months, but Jake could see her hands shaking slightly. "Remember?" Jake whispered to her. "They might look strange, but they're just people trying to do their jobs." Lisa nodded, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Most of the beings in this chamber thought humans were barely smart enough to tie their own shoes. Earth had only joined the Galactic Council 6 months ago, and the other species made it clear they saw humans as the new kids who didn't belong at the adult table. A sound like breaking glass filled the air. That meant the council session was starting. Council Prime Advisor Veltaran rose from his seat. He stood 12 feet tall and looked like someone had carved him from purple crystal. When light hit him, it split into rainbow colors that danced across the chamber walls. "The council recognizes the human delegation," Veltaran said. His voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "You have requested emergency session time to address what you call a galaxy-wide threat. Proceed." Jake stepped forward. He had practiced this speech 100 times, but his mouth still felt dry. "Honored council members, Earth has detected massive energy readings at the edge of our galaxy. These readings are unlike anything in our databases or yours. The energy patterns match descriptions from our oldest historical records, stories our ancestors told about entities they called the Devourers." A sound like laughter came from the reptilian section. The Siskatar representative, a being that looked like a 7-foot-tall lizard wearing fancy robes, spoke up. "Historical records? You mean fairy tales and bedtime stories?" More laughter rippled through the chamber. Jake felt his face getting hot, but he continued. "These aren't just stories. Our sensors show massive objects moving through dark space, consuming everything in their path. Entire star systems are going dark along their route." Dr. Grant activated her holographic display. 3-dimensional images filled the space above their platform. These readings were taken by our deep space monitoring stations over the past 6 months. Notice the pattern of disappearances moving inward from the galaxy's edge. The images showed a map of their galaxy with red dots marking dead or missing systems. The pattern formed a rough line pointing toward the more populated inner systems where most council species lived. Council member Quindril floated forward. He belonged to a species called the Zephyrians, beings that looked like glowing jellyfish but could survive in space. "Dr. Grant, your species has been part of our community for less than 1 standard year. Your technology is thousands of years behind ours. What makes you think you can detect threats that our advanced sensor networks cannot?" Lisa's voice stayed steady, but Jake could hear the frustration underneath. "Because we're looking for something you've never encountered. Our historical records describe these entities from when they last passed through this galaxy, over 50,000 years ago. Your species were likely not even spacefaring then." That comment brought angry sounds from several sections. A being that looked like a walking tree spoke up in a voice like creaking wood. "The Velkaran civilization is over 200,000 years old. We have no records of any such entities." "Because they consume everything," Jake said, louder than he had planned. "They don't just destroy planets or ships. They consume matter itself, converting it to pure energy. Any civilization that encounters them either escapes or ceases to exist entirely. There would be no records left behind." The chamber fell quiet for a moment. Then Veltaran spoke again. "Captain Morrison, even if we accepted your claims about these Devourers, why should we trust defensive strategies from a species that has never fought a space war? Humans have been in space for less than 2 centuries. Some of us have been exploring the stars since before your species discovered fire." Jake looked around the chamber at all the alien faces staring at him. Some looked amused, others bored, most just dismissive. "Because we survived them before. Our ancestors faced these entities when they were trapped on one planet, with primitive weapons. They found a way to make the Devourers move on instead of destroying everything. That knowledge is still in our records." "Primitive superstitions," said another voice. "This came from something that looked like a floating brain surrounded by mechanical arms. Captain, your species believes in invisible skyfathers and thinks that burning plants can cure diseases. Why would we trust your ancient myths over our proven science?" Lisa stepped forward again. With respect, Council member, our primitive medicine saved 3 billion lives last year from the Centauri plague that your advanced medical science couldn't cure. Sometimes old knowledge has value. That brought some uncomfortable shifting from the medical research section, but most of the chamber still seemed unconvinced. Jake tried one more time. I'm not asking you to believe our stories. I'm asking you to look at the evidence. Systems are going dark. The pattern is moving inward. Whether you call them devourers or something else, something is coming this way and it's consuming everything in its path. Velterran raised one crystal hand. Captain Morrison, Dr. Grant, the Council appreciates your concern for galactic safety. However, we cannot base policy decisions on unverified sensor readings and ancient folklore. Your request for immediate military mobilization and evacuation of Outer Rim colonies is denied. But the evidence, Lisa started, shows unusual energy readings that have multiple possible explanations. Quindril interrupted. Equipment malfunctions, stellar phenomena, even attempts by primitive species to gain attention through false alarms. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. You think we're making this up? Not deliberately, Velterran said, and his tone almost sounded kind. But your species has a documented tendency toward paranoia and pattern-seeking in random events. What you see as evidence of ancient monsters, we see as the natural anxiety of a young species trying to find its place in a larger universe. The vote came quickly. 3,000 species voted to ignore Earth's warning. Only 12 voted to investigate further, and most of those were small colonies that depended on human trade. As Jake and Lisa gathered their materials, conversations resumed around them. Jake heard fragments in the common galactic language, typical human drama. They'll learn to calm down eventually. Remember when the Altarians thought solar flares were enemy weapons? Walking toward the exit, Jake heard one comment clearly. It came from a group of young council members, beings barely out of their species' equivalent of college. I heard humans used to think their planet was flat, and that they were the center of the universe. Now they think ancient monsters are coming to eat the galaxy. Some species never outgrow their childhood fears. The laughter that followed hurt more than Jake had expected. Outside the council chamber, Lisa finally let her professional mask slip. They didn't even look at the data. Not really. They made up their minds before we started talking. Jake nodded, looking back at the massive building that housed the Galactic Council. Ships from hundreds of worlds came and went from the landing platforms that covered its surface. They think we're children playing with toys we don't understand. Maybe we should let them handle it their way, Lisa said quietly. Maybe we're wrong about what's coming. Jake thought about the data they had collected, the patterns that had kept him awake for months. We're not wrong. And when they figure that out, a lot of people are going to die. They walked toward their small transport ship in silence, leaving behind the most advanced civilization in the galaxy to face a threat it refused to see coming. 3 months had passed since the Council dismissed Earth's warning. Jake Morrison sat in his office on Luna Station, staring at reports that made his stomach turn. The data kept coming in, and every piece of it proved that humans had been right. The first disappearance happened at Mining Station Alpha 7, a Velcaran operation in the Outer Rim. One day it was sending regular reports about rare metal extraction. The next day, nothing. No distress signal, no debris field, no evidence it had ever existed except for the gap in their production schedules. Another one, Dr. Lisa Grant said, walking into Jake's office with a fresh data pad. The Sikatar research facility on Kepler 442b. They were studying ancient rock formations. Now the whole planet is gone. Jake rubbed his eyes. He had been reading similar reports for weeks. Gone how? Destroyed? Evacuated? Gone. As in, there's nothing where the planet used to be. Not even asteroid debris. The star is still there, but everything else in that system has vanished. Lisa sat down across from his desk. She looked as tired as Jake felt. I've been tracking the pattern. 43 systems have gone completely dark. All of them on the Outer Rim. All of them following the same path we predicted. What's the Council saying about it? Lisa laughed, but there was no humor in it. Equipment failures. Communication blackouts. Solar storms. Yesterday I heard Council member Zexenal explaining that primitive mining operations probably just broke down, and the crews abandoned them. Jake stood up and walked to the window. Earth hung in space below him, looking peaceful and blue. It was hard to believe something was coming to destroy everything they had built. 43 systems don't just break down at the same time. The Council's Science Committee released a statement, Lisa said, reading from her pad. They say the missing facilities were all using outdated technology that couldn't handle routine stellar phenomena. They recommend better maintenance schedules. Stellar phenomena. Jake turned back to face her. Lisa, you've seen the sensor readings. What kind of stellar phenomena leaves perfectly spherical empty spaces where planets used to be? Before Lisa could answer, Jake's communication system chimed. Captain Morrison, you have a priority message from Commander Amy Rodriguez. Jake hit the accept button. Amy's face appeared on his wall screen. She was calling from the bridge of her ship, and Jake could see the worry in her eyes. Jake, we've got a problem. I'm at the Rigel system investigating the mining station disappearance. You need to see this. The screen switched to external camera view. Jake had expected to see empty space, maybe some debris. Instead, he saw something that made his mind struggle to understand what he was looking at. There was a hole in space itself. Not darkness, not empty void, but an actual absence of anything. It was perfectly round, about the size of what a planet should be, and looking at it made Jake feel dizzy. Amy, what am I looking at? Her voice came back tense and quiet. Near as we can figure, this is where Rigel 4 used to be. But it's not just gone, Jake. It's like it never existed. Our sensors can't read anything there. Not vacuum, not radiation, not even the background energy that exists everywhere in space. Tony Chen, Amy's communications specialist, leaned into view. Captain, we tried sending a probe into that area. The probe didn't get destroyed or damaged. It just stopped existing the moment it crossed the boundary. Jake felt cold spreading through his chest. How big is the affected area? The hole itself is about 12,000 kilometers across, Amy said. But there are smaller holes scattered throughout the system. Looks like the moon's got the same treatment. Lisa leaned toward the screen. Amy, have you detected any energy signatures? Weapon residue? Anything that might tell us what caused this? Nothing. Whatever did this, it didn't leave any trace behind. But Jake, there's something else. Katie Brooks ran a spectral analysis of the surrounding space. The area around each hole shows signs of what she calls reality stress. Like space itself is tired. Jake had heard enough. Amy, get your people out of there now. Don't take any chances. Already on our way out, Amy said. But Jake, if this is what you warned the council about, they need to see this data. After the call ended, Jake and Lisa sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Lisa spoke. We have to try again. The council can't ignore this. They'll find a way, Jake said. They've invested too much pride in dismissing us. Admitting we were right means admitting they were wrong. Lisa stood up. Then we make it impossible for them to ignore. I'm calling an emergency council session and presenting this evidence directly to the full assembly. 2 days later, Jake found himself back in the massive council chamber. This time, he wasn't alone on the human platform. Amy Rodriguez stood with him, along with Katie Brooks and Tony Chen. They had all volunteered to present their findings to the council. The chamber felt different this time. Word had spread about the missing systems, and even the most arrogant council members seemed uneasy. But their official position hadn't changed. Belteran called the session to order. Dr. Grant, you have requested emergency time to present what you call critical evidence of an external threat. The Science Committee has reviewed your data and found it inconclusive. Lisa activated the holographic display. The images from Amy's investigation filled the space above the chamber floor. Gasps and sounds of shock came from several sections as the aliens saw the holes in space. Honored council members, Lisa said, these images were taken at 17 different systems over the past month. In each case, the pattern is identical. Planets, moons, and artificial structures have been completely removed from reality. Councilmember Quindrell floated forward. Dr. Grant, while these images are indeed disturbing, there are several possible explanations that don't require invoking mythical entities. Such as, Jake asked, experimental weapons testing by an unknown species, natural phenomena we don't yet understand, even elaborate hoaxes designed to create panic. Amy stepped forward. With respect, sir, I've been flying in space for 20 years. I know the difference between a hoax and a threat that consumed an entire planet. The reptilian Eschatar representative spoke up. Commander Rodriguez, your species has been in space for less than 2 centuries. Many of us have been exploring the galaxy for millennia. What you see as impossible threat, we see as natural stellar evolution that your primitive sensors cannot properly interpret. Tony Chen couldn't stay quiet any longer. Stellar evolution doesn't leave perfectly spherical holes in space. Our sensors might be primitive, but they can tell the difference between a planet and nothing at all. Laughter came from several sections. One of the young council members Jake remembered from last time spoke up. The human delegation seems to believe that their amateur investigation has discovered something that escaped the notice of our most advanced scientific institutions. Perhaps they should consider the possibility that their equipment is simply malfunctioning. Jake felt his temper rising. Our equipment detected the threat 3 months ago when you all said it didn't exist. Now 17 systems have vanished and you're still calling it equipment malfunction. Veltaran raised his hand for silence. Captain Morrison, the Council appreciates your continued concern. However, we cannot base galactic policy on incomplete data and speculation. What about the refugee testimonies? Lisa asked. We have survivors from 3 of the attacked systems. They all describe the same thing. Massive shadow entities that consume everything in their path. Council member Zexnall stood up. He was a being that looked like a cross between an octopus and a machine, with metal tentacles that clicked against each other when he moved. Dr. Grant, traumatized individuals often create false memories to explain experiences they cannot understand. These testimonies are more likely psychological responses to equipment failures than accurate descriptions of actual events. Jake looked around the chamber. Some of the aliens looked worried, but most still seemed dismissive. A few were even ignoring the presentation entirely, working on their own projects. So what will it take? Jake asked. How many systems have to disappear before you admit there's a real threat? Quindril floated higher, his jellyfish-like body glowing brighter. Captain Morrison, even if we accepted that some external force is responsible for these disappearances, the Galactic Defense Fleet is more than capable of handling any threat. Our combined technology represents the pinnacle of galactic civilization. We have conquered space itself, added the tree-like being from the Velkaran delegation. We have weapons that can crack planets and shields that can stop stellar radiation. What possible threat could exist that our united fleets cannot handle? Jake exchanged glances with his team. He could see the same frustration in their eyes that he felt. You're not listening. This isn't about weapons or shields. The entities we're dealing with don't fight battles. They consume matter itself. Theoretical nonsense, Zexnall said. No biological entity can convert matter to energy with perfect efficiency. It violates basic physical laws. Lisa stepped forward one more time. These aren't biological entities. They're something else entirely. Something our ancestors encountered before and learned to survive. Ancient human folklore, Veltaran said dismissively. Captain Morris and Dr. Grant, the Council has made its position clear. We will monitor the situation and respond appropriately if a genuine threat materializes. The session ended with Admiral Kitharos had commanded the Zentaran Navy for over 200 years. In that time, he had fought pirates, rebels, and even a few small wars between Council species. He had never lost a battle. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Victory, he felt confident that record would continue. The first response fleet stretched out around him in perfect formation. 12 different species had contributed ships, creating the most powerful military force ever assembled in galactic history. The Velkaran battlecruisers gleamed like purple crystals, their energy weapons already charging. The Sekitar destroyers moved in perfect hunting formations, their reptilian crews eager for combat. The Zephyrian fighters danced through space like glowing jellyfish, their pilots connected to their ships through neural links. All ships report ready, Admiral, his communications officer announced. The officer was a young Zentaran, barely 50 years old, and his crystal body sparkled with excitement. Kitharos nodded. Begin the advance. Maintain formation until we have visual contact with the target. The fleet moved toward the Helios system, where the Council's long-range sensors had finally detected something moving through space. After months of denying humanity's warnings, the Council had been forced to act when entire systems started disappearing in rapid succession. But Kitharos wasn't worried. Whatever was out there, it would face the combined might of galactic civilization. Admiral, his science officer called out, we're detecting massive energy readings ahead, multiple contacts moving in our direction. Size and composition? The science officer's crystal body flickered with confusion. Sir, the readings don't match any known ship types. The contacts appear to be organic, but they're enormous. The smallest one is over 3 kilometers long. Kithiros felt his first moment of doubt. 3 kilometers was larger than most space stations, let alone living creatures. Put it on the main screen. The view screen showed the black of space ahead of them. Then slowly shapes began to emerge from the darkness. They looked like massive sea creatures swimming through space, but their bodies seemed to absorb light itself. Tentacles that stretched for kilometers writhed around central masses that hurt to look at directly. By the ancient crystals, whispered his communications officer. What are those things? Before Kithiros could answer, the creatures began to move faster. They didn't accelerate like ships, but rather seemed to bend space around themselves, covering impossible distances in seconds. All ships, battle formation, Kithiros commanded. Prepare to engage. The Velkaran cruisers fired first. Their energy weapons could melt through asteroid fields, and the purple beams that shot toward the creatures were bright enough to be seen from neighboring star systems. The beams struck the lead creature directly in its center mass. Nothing happened. The energy simply vanished into the creature's body, absorbed like water into sand. Weapons had no effect, his tactical officer reported, his voice tight with disbelief. The Sakatar destroyers tried next, firing solid projectiles that moved at nearly the speed of light. The metal slugs passed right through the creatures as if they weren't there, continuing on into empty space. Sir, the projectiles are reading as having struck something, but there's no damage to the targets, the tactical officer said. That's when the creatures began to fight back. Tendrils of pure darkness reached out from their bodies, moving faster than any ship could dodge. When the darkness touched the first Velkaran cruiser, the massive ship simply stopped existing. No explosion, no debris field, just empty space where a moment before there had been a ship with 800 crew members. Evasive maneuvers. Kithiros shouted. All ships scatter. But it was too late. The creatures moved through the fleet like sharks through a school of fish. Each touch of their dark tendrils meant another ship vanished completely. The Eschatar destroyers tried to use their speed to escape, but the creatures moved through space itself, covering distances that should have taken hours in mere seconds. Kithiros watched his perfect formation dissolve into chaos. Ships that had served for centuries, crews that had trained their entire lives, all of it meant nothing against an enemy that didn't follow the rules of reality. Admiral, we're receiving reports from across the fleet, his communications officer said, his voice breaking. The creatures are absorbing our energy weapons and converting destroyed ships into some kind of biomass. They're growing larger with each ship they consume. The truth hit Kithiros like a physical blow. The humans had been right. These weren't enemies that could be fought with conventional weapons. They were forces of nature, natural disasters with intelligence and hunger. Order all ships to retreat, he commanded. Emergency jump to the rally point. Sir, half our ships are already gone. The ones that remain are having trouble getting clear. The creatures seem to be disrupting our jump drives. Kithiros looked at his tactical display. Red markers showing destroyed ships covered the screen like drops of blood. Of his original fleet of 300 vessels, fewer than 80 remained and more disappeared every second. His own ship shuddered as something massive passed nearby. Through the view screen, he could see one of the creatures up close. Its body was covered with what looked like eyes, but they weren't biological eyes. They were holes in reality itself, windows into something that his mind couldn't understand. Jump drive is ready, Admiral, his navigation officer reported. Execute jump. Get us out of here. The Eternal Victory vanished from the battle zone in a flash of light. Around the Helios system, the surviving ships of the first response fleet fled in all directions, leaving behind the creatures that had destroyed the most powerful military force in galactic history. News of the defeat reached the council chambers within hours. Kithiros stood before the same assembly that had dismissed human warnings, but now the chamber was nearly empty. Many council members had fled to their home systems to organize defenses. Admiral, Veltaran said, his crystal body dim with shock, your report states that conventional weapons had no effect on these entities. That's correct, Prime Advisor. Energy weapons were absorbed. Projectiles passed through them harmlessly, and they seem immune to all forms of electronic warfare. Council member Quindrell floated forward, his usual confidence replaced by visible fear. How is that possible? Our weapons are based on fundamental physical forces. I don't know, Kithiros admitted, but I can tell you what I saw. These creatures don't just destroy ships or planets. They consume matter itself and convert it into energy for their own use. Every ship we lost made them stronger. The tree-like Velcaran representative creaked when he spoke. What about our defensive systems? Surely our planetary shields can protect our worlds. Sir, they consumed 3 of our shield generators by touch alone. The energy that powered those shields just made them hungrier. Panic began to spread through the remaining council members. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. The creatures had split into multiple groups after the battle, heading toward the more populated inner systems. Entire colonies were going dark as the entities moved inward. The ethereal representative, a cloud of gas held together by force fields, spoke in a voice like wind through caves. Our homeworld of Etheria has been evacuated. 3 billion souls fled as fast as our transport ships could carry them. The creatures consumed our world in 6 hours. Similar reports came from other species. The crystal cities of Zentara Prime, thought to be indestructible, had shattered like glass when the creatures arrived. The underwater civilization of the Aquarians had watched helplessly as their oceans were drained away, converted to energy in moments. Veltaran's light grew even dimmer. Admiral, in your professional opinion, can these entities be stopped by military force? Kitharos thought about the battle he had witnessed, the way ships had simply ceased to exist, the horrible intelligence he had seen in those reality-hole eyes. No, sir, not with any weapons or tactics we currently possess. Then what do you recommend? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Finally, one of the younger council members spoke up. It was the same being who had mocked human warnings months ago. What about the humans? They claimed their ancestors had encountered these entities before. Murmurs of desperate hope mixed with wounded pride filled the chamber. After months of dismissing humanity as primitive and paranoid, the council was finally ready to listen. Quindril floated higher, his body pulsing with agitation. Are we seriously considering asking for help from a species that hasn't even mastered interstellar travel? They predicted this, Veltaran said quietly. They warned us exactly what would happen, and we didn't listen. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of various alien breathing and energy cycling. Finally, Veltaran spoke again. Prepare a message to Earth. Tell them we require immediate assistance. The words came out like they were being torn from his crystal throat. The most advanced civilization in the galaxy was asking for help from the species they had mocked as primitive children. As the message was sent, reports continued to stream in. More systems going dark, more populations fleeing their homeworlds, more evidence that traditional military response was not just useless, but actively harmful. Every weapon President Helen Martinez sat in the Situation Room deep beneath the United Nations building in New York. The room had been built to handle Earth's greatest crises, but nothing in its design had prepared it for a call from an alien civilization begging for help. The holographic display showed the message that had arrived from the Galactic Council just hours earlier. Veltaran's crystal face looked dim and desperate as he spoke. President Martinez, the Galactic Council formally requests immediate assistance from Earth. We acknowledge that our previous dismissal of your warnings was in error. The entities you described have begun consuming core systems. Our military response has failed completely. We are prepared to discuss any terms Earth deems necessary for your aid. Jake Morrison stood at the far end of the room, studying tactical displays that showed the creature's movement through council space. 3 months ago, these same beings had laughed at his warnings. Now their most advanced fleets were space dust and entire civilizations were fleeing their homeworlds. How bad is it? President Martinez asked. General Carl Davis, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, pulled up a galactic map. Red zones marked areas where the entities had passed. 47 systems completely consumed in the past 2 weeks. The creatures have split into at least 12 separate groups, all heading toward populated areas. Current estimates suggest they'll reach the major council worlds within days. Dr. Lisa Grant sat across from Jake, her laptop open to files that humanity had hoped never to use. The pattern matches our historical records perfectly. The entities start at the galaxy's edge, consume everything in their path, then converge on the core systems where the highest concentration of life exists. But our ancestors survived them, Martinez said. How? Lisa looked up from her files. Not by fighting them. By understanding what they actually are and giving them what they want without destroying everything else in the process. Admiral Steve Parker leaned forward. He commanded Earth's small but growing space navy. Ma'am, with respect, the Council has ships we can't even dream of building. If their weapons can't touch these things, what makes us think we can do better? Jake finally spoke. Because we're not going to fight them. Everyone in the room turned to look at him. Martinez raised an eyebrow. Explain. The Devourers aren't evil, Jake said. They're not invaders or conquerors. They're a natural force like a hurricane or an earthquake, but with intelligence. They consume matter and convert it to energy because that's what they evolved to do. Fighting them is like trying to punch a tornado. Lisa nodded. Our ancestors called them Devourers, but that's not really accurate. They're entropy made conscious. They exist to return complex matter to its simplest energy state. General Davis frowned. So how do you stop entropy? You don't stop it, Jake said. You redirect it. Martinez looked between Jake and Lisa. I need more than riddles. If we're going to help, I need to know exactly what you're proposing. Lisa opened her laptop and projected images onto the room's main screen. Ancient cave paintings showed massive dark shapes moving through star fields. These drawings are from Tibet, created over 50,000 years ago. They show the last time the Devourers passed through this galaxy. The paintings depicted something that looked like a ritual. Human figures surrounded by geometric patterns with the dark shapes moving away from populated areas. According to the records that survived, our ancestors didn't fight the entities. They created controlled entropy fields, places where the Devourers could feed without destroying inhabited worlds. Admiral Parker studied the images. How? By using the one thing Council species refused to consider, Jake said. Controlled self-destruction. We built devices that could break down matter in a controlled way, giving the entities what they craved while protecting everything else. The room fell silent. Finally, General Davis spoke. You're talking about building weapons that create entropy fields. Do we even have that technology? Lisa smiled for the first time in weeks. Actually, we do. Remember Project Genesis? Martinez's eyes widened. The terraforming project? The one that was shut down because it was too dangerous? The same one. Genesis was designed to break down matter at the molecular level to prepare dead worlds for terraforming. We shelved it because the entropy field generators were too powerful. They could accidentally consume an entire planet if something went wrong. Jake nodded. What was too dangerous for terraforming might be perfect for feeding entropy entities. Admiral Parker looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, we're talking about building devices that could theoretically destroy worlds, then putting them in the path of creatures we don't fully understand. What if they decide to come after us next? They won't, Lisa said confidently. The historical records are clear. Once the entities found controlled entropy sources, they stopped consuming inhabited systems. They fed on the artificial sources for several thousand years, then moved on to the next galaxy. President Martinez stood up and walked to the window that showed the Earth's surface far above them. What about the Council? Are we just going to let them think we're their saviors while we redirect these creatures toward other targets? Jake shook his head. We're not redirecting them toward targets. We're offering them sustainable food sources that don't require destroying civilizations. Think of it like giving a hungry animal access to a food dish instead of letting it hunt your livestock. And the Council species that laughed at our warnings will learn a valuable lesson about listening to advice from species they consider primitive. Martinez turned back to face the room. How long would it take to build these entropy generators? Lisa consulted her notes. The Genesis prototypes still exist. With modifications, we could have working units within 2 weeks. But there's a catch. There always is. What? Someone has to deliver them to the entities. The generators need to be placed in their path, close enough that the creatures will choose the artificial entropy over natural sources. It's essentially a suicide mission. The room fell quiet again. Finally, Admiral Parker spoke. How close? Close enough to touch them, Jake said quietly. The volunteer crews would need to fly right up to the entities and deploy the generators manually. Our ancestors did it in primitive spacecraft. We can do it too. General Davis studied the tactical displays. Captain Morrison, you're talking about flying up to creatures that consumed our most advanced military fleets without taking damage. What makes you think our ships would survive long enough to deploy anything? Because we won't be attacking them, Jake said. Every ship that got destroyed was firing weapons or powering defensive systems. The entities consumed that energy and used it to destroy the ships. But if we approach them with no weapons powered, no shields active, essentially offering ourselves as willing participants rather than threats. They might let us get close enough to deploy the generators, Lisa finished. Martinez looked around the room at her advisors. Recommendations? General Davis spoke first. Ma'am, it's incredibly risky. But doing nothing means watching the galaxy burn, and Earth won't be safe once these things finish with Council space. Admiral Parker nodded reluctantly. The volunteer crews would essentially be kamikaze pilots. But if it works, we save billions of lives. Jake stepped forward. I'll lead the mission personally. It was my warning they ignored, my responsibility to see this through. Absolutely not, Martinez said firmly. I'm not sending the man who predicted this disaster on a suicide mission. We need you alive to coordinate with the Council. Then I'll do it, Admiral Parker said. It's what we're trained for. Lisa closed her laptop. The mission parameters are specific. The crews need to understand exactly what they're dealing with. These aren't just alien monsters. They're forces of nature that happen to have intelligence. Approaching them requires a completely different mindset than normal military operations. Martinez made her decision. Greenlight the entropy generator project. Start modifying the Genesis prototypes immediately. Admiral Parker, begin selecting volunteers for the deployment mission. And someone get me a direct line to the Galactic Council. If we're going to save their civilizations, they're going to hear exactly how we plan to do it. As the meeting broke up, Jake remained behind with Lisa. You really think this will work? Lisa looked at the ancient cave paintings still displayed on the screen. Our ancestors survived 50,000 years ago with stone tools and wooden ships. We have better technology and the same knowledge. If they could do it, so can we. And if we're wrong, then the galaxy burns and Earth gets consumed along with everything else. But at least we'll go down fighting the right battle. Through the window far above them, Earth continued its peaceful rotation, unaware that its youngest spacefaring species was about to attempt something that would either save the galaxy or destroy it completely. The creatures called Devourers continued their inward advance, consuming worlds and growing stronger, while humanity prepared to offer them a different kind of meal. The next few days would determine whether wisdom could triumph over power, and whether the species dismissed as primitive children could teach the galaxy's greatest civilizations how to survive. Commander Amy Rodriguez floated in the pilot seat of her modified transport ship, the UES Covenant, watching the largest creature she had ever seen move through space ahead of her. The Devourer stretched over 8 kilometers from its front tentacles to its rear appendages, and its body seemed to absorb light itself, creating a moving hole in the starfield. Distance to target, 200 kilometers in closing, reported Tony Chen from the communications station. His voice stayed steady, but Amy could see his hands shaking slightly as he worked his controls. Katie Brooks looked up from the engineering console where she monitored the entropy generator in their cargo bay. Generator is stable and ready for deployment. Power levels are nominal. Containment field is holding. Amy nodded. Remember, no weapons, no shields, no aggressive actions of any kind. We approach as humble visitors offering a gift, not as warriors. The past 2 weeks had been the most intense of Amy's life. While Earth's best scientists worked around the clock to modify the Genesis terraforming equipment into entropy generators, she and her crew had trained for a mission unlike any in human history. They weren't going to destroy an enemy or explore unknown space. They were going to make first contact with forces of nature that happened to have intelligence. Dr. Lisa Grant's voice came through their communication system from the command ship, following at a safe distance. Covenant, you are approaching the entity's influence field. From this point forward, it may be aware of your presence. Through the view screen, Amy could see the creature more clearly now. Its surface wasn't smooth like she had expected, but covered with what looked like complex geometric patterns that shifted and changed as she watched. The patterns reminded her of mathematical equations made visible, formulas for converting matter to energy written in living flesh. It's beautiful, Katie said quietly. Terrifying but beautiful. Tony checked his sensors. Commander, I'm detecting massive energy readings from the entity, but they're not aggressive. More like curiosity? The thing is scanning us. Amy felt a strange tingling sensation like static electricity running over her skin. Everyone stay calm. It's trying to understand what we are. The creature's movement changed. Instead of the smooth gliding it had maintained while consuming the nearby moon, It began to drift toward their small ship. Tentacles that could wrap around space stations reached out in their direction. 50 kilometers and closing, Tony reported. Commander, if this goes wrong, we won't have time to escape. We're not here to escape, Amy reminded him. We're here to make an offering. As they got closer, Amy began to understand why the Council fleets had been destroyed so easily. The creature wasn't malicious, but it radiated power on a scale that made normal weapons seem like throwing pebbles at a hurricane. Energy danced across its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly, and she could feel reality itself bending around its massive form. 10 kilometers, Tony said. The entity has stopped its advance. I think it's waiting to see what we do. Amy activated the cargo bay controls. Katie, prepare to deploy the generator on my signal. Ready, Commander. Amy took a deep breath and activated their communication array. Not to send a message to other humans, but to broadcast directly toward the creature ahead of them. This is Commander Amy Rodriguez of Earth. We come in peace, offering a gift to sustain you without requiring the destruction of inhabited worlds. She didn't expect an answer in words. What she got was something far more profound. Knowledge flowed directly into her mind. Not through her ears or eyes, but through some deeper channel she hadn't known existed. The information came so fast and in such alien concepts that her consciousness nearly shut down from the overload. She saw the galaxy as the Devourers saw it. Not as stars and planets and civilizations, but as complex patterns of energy temporarily organized into more sophisticated forms. They didn't see the destruction of worlds as evil any more than humans saw the consumption of food as murder. It was simply the natural process of returning organized matter to its fundamental energy state. But there was more. The Devourers were ancient beyond human comprehension, older than the galaxy itself. They had been consuming matter and energy since shortly after the universe began, not out of malice, but because it was their nature. They were entropy given consciousness, the universe's way of preventing any one region from becoming too organized, too stable, and they remembered humanity. 50,000 years ago, when they had last passed through this galaxy, one small world had offered them something unprecedented, controlled entropy that satisfied their needs without requiring the destruction of complex civilizations. It had been such a novel concept that they had preserved the memory across millennia. Commander, Katie's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you all right? Amy blinked, realizing she had been silent for several minutes while the alien knowledge filled her mind. I'm okay. Deploy the generator, now. The cargo bay doors opened and the modified Genesis device drifted out into space between their ship and the massive creature. The generator was smaller than a car, insignificant compared to the entity examining it. But the moment it activated, the Devourer's attention focused entirely on it. The entropy field blossomed like a flower made of pure mathematics. Space itself began to break down in a controlled way, creating the exact type of energy the creature craved. But unlike the chaotic destruction that came from consuming planets or ships, this was organized, sustainable, renewable. Amy felt the creature's surprise and something that might have been gratitude. The massive entity reached out with one of its smaller tentacles and touched the entropy generator. Instead of consuming it, the creature seemed to adjust something in its own structure, creating a symbiotic connection that would allow it to feed from the artificial entropy indefinitely. Tony, are you getting readings on this? Yes, Commander. The entity has integrated our generator into its own energy matrix. It's feeding from the entropy field but not consuming the generator itself. The device should continue operating for decades. Through the view screen, Amy watched the creature begin to change. Its movement became less predatory, more peaceful. The patterns on its surface shifted from the aggressive configurations she had seen before to something that looked almost like contentment. Lisa Grant's voice came through the communications. Outstanding work, Covenant. The entity has stopped its advance toward the inhabited systems and appears to be settling into a stable orbit around your position. Amy felt the knowledge the creature had shared, with her settling into a more understandable form. Dr. Grant, there are 11 more groups of entities moving through Council space. Each one needs its own entropy generator. We have them ready. 11 more volunteer crews are prepared to deploy. Can you coordinate with the other entities the way you did with this one? Amy looked at the massive creature now drifting peacefully near their ship, feeding from humanity's gift of controlled entropy. The knowledge it had shared included awareness of its companions scattered throughout the galaxy. Yes, this one can communicate with the others. They'll know what to expect when our ships approach. Over the next week, Amy watched as human ships made contact with each group of devourers. Captain Ben Phillips approached a cluster of 3 entities near the Andromeda Nebula. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez made contact with the largest group, 5 creatures heading toward the heavily populated core systems. Commander Rick Foster delivered his generator to a pair of entities that had been consuming the outer rim mining colonies. Each contact followed the same pattern. Human crews approached with no weapons, no shields, no aggressive intent. They offered their gifts of controlled entropy, and the ancient creatures accepted them gratefully, settling into stable feeding patterns that satisfied their needs without requiring the destruction of inhabited worlds. The change in the galaxy was immediate and dramatic. Systems that had gone dark began sending out signals again, as the devourers moved away from populated areas. Refugee fleets that had fled their homeworlds began the long journey back to rebuild. The Council species slowly began to understand that humanity had not just saved them, but had solved a problem that had threatened the galaxy for millions of years. Amy remained on station near her devourer, monitoring the entropy generator and serving as a liaison between humanity and the ancient entity. The creature had shared enough knowledge with her that she could sense its contentment. For the first time in millions of years, it could feed without destroying complex civilizations. It was a gift that would sustain it for millennia. "Commander," Katie said one day as they watched the creature drift peacefully through space, "do you think they'll remember this? I mean, really remember. Not just as another species that helped them, but as the ones who changed everything." Amy thought about the vast alien intelligence that had touched her mind, the memories that stretched back to the beginning of time itself. They'll remember, and maybe next time they pass through a galaxy, they'll look for species wise enough to offer partnership instead of resistance. Tony looked up from his console where he was monitoring communications from across the galaxy. "Commander, we're receiving a priority message from the Galactic Council. They want to speak with you directly." Amy smiled. After months of dismissing humanity's warnings, the Council was finally the great assembly hall of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Where once thousands of representatives from hundreds of species had debated and argued, now only a few hundred survivors remained. Many of the floating platforms that had held proud delegations were empty, their occupants either dead or fled to distant colonies. Jake Morrison walked through the hall that had once seemed so overwhelming. 3 months ago, he had stood on that small human platform trying to warn beings who saw him as a primitive child. Now those same beings waited for him to speak, their alien faces showing emotions he had learned to recognize: shame, gratitude, and desperate hope. Council Prime Advisor Veltaran stood at the center of the chamber. The crystal being's purple light was brighter than Jake had ever seen it, but somehow more humble. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the condescension Jake remembered. "Captain Morrison, representatives of Earth, the Galactic Council formally acknowledges our failure to heed your warnings. Your species has saved not just our civilizations, but the concept of civilization itself in this galaxy." Jake nodded politely, but his attention was focused on the aftermath report streaming across his datapad. 12 different devourer groups all successfully redirected to entropy generators. 0 additional systems consumed since the human intervention began. 3 billion refugees beginning the journey back to their homeworlds. "The question now," Veltaran continued, "is how we prevent such catastrophic blindness from occurring again." Dr. Lisa Grant stepped forward from the human delegation. "Prime Advisor, with respect, the problem wasn't blindness. It was pride." A ripple of uncomfortable sounds went through the chamber, even after everything that had happened, suggesting that the Council's greatest species were ruled by pride, was still a dangerous statement. Quindril, the Zephyrian Science Committee leader, floated higher. His jellyfish-like body glowed dimly, a sign of embarrassment in his species. "Dr. Grant, could you explain what you mean?" Lisa activated a holographic display showing the timeline of events. "For months, we provided evidence of an approaching threat. Your response wasn't based on scientific analysis of that evidence. It was based on the assumption that a species as young as humanity couldn't possibly understand something that your advanced civilizations had missed." The truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jake watched alien faces around the chamber as they processed what Lisa was saying. Some looked angry, others ashamed, but most just looked tired. Admiral Kithiros spoke from the military section. The Zentaran's crystal body was scarred from his battle with the Devourers, and his light was much dimmer than it had been. Dr. Grant is correct. I dismissed human tactical analysis because I couldn't accept that beings with 2 centuries of space experience might understand warfare better than species with millennia of military history. But you did understand it better, said a new voice. Everyone turned to see Council Member Zexanol rising from his seat. The octopus-like being's mechanical tentacles clicked nervously against each other. Your strategy worked perfectly. Our strategy killed millions of our own people. Jake felt the weight of the moment settling on him. These beings had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had technologies humanity could barely understand. Civilizations older than human recorded history. Wisdom accumulated across millennia. But when it mattered most, all of that advancement had been meaningless without the most basic ingredient of survival, the humility to listen to warnings from unlikely sources. The real question, Jake said, is what happens now. The entropy generators will keep the Devourers fed for thousands of years, but that's not a permanent solution. Eventually, they'll need to move on to the next galaxy, and other entities like them might appear. Veltarin's light pulsed thoughtfully. What do you propose? A fundamental change in how the Council operates, Lisa said. No more dismissing warnings based on the technological level of the species making them. No more assuming that newer members have nothing valuable to contribute. The tree-like representative from the Velkaran delegation creaked as he leaned forward. You're suggesting we rebuild our entire governmental structure around the opinions of primitive species? Jake felt his temper rise, but before he could respond, Admiral Kytheros spoke up. Council member, with respect, the primitive species you're referring to just saved your civilization. Perhaps it's time to reconsider what we mean by primitive. What we mean, said a quiet voice from the back of the chamber, is different from us. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was one of the younger council members, a being from a species called the Morphic that could change their physical form at will. Currently, she looked like a combination of several other species, as if she was trying to represent everyone at once. I apologize for interrupting, she continued, but I think that's the real issue. We didn't dismiss human warnings because humans are technologically primitive. We dismissed them because humans think differently than we do. Jake studied the young alien. How do you mean? Most council species have never faced extinction. We've had wars and disasters, but we've never been reduced to a few thousand individuals hiding in caves, forced to develop survival strategies or die completely. She shifted her form to look more human-like. Humans have. Your entire species carries genetic memory of near-extinction events. You see threats we don't see because you've learned to see them. Lisa nodded slowly. That's why our ancestors survived the Devourers. They didn't try to fight entropy. They learned to work with it. And that's why you warned us, Veltarin said. Not because your technology detected something ours missed, but because your survival instincts recognized a pattern we couldn't see. The chamber fell quiet as the implications sank in. Jake looked around at the alien faces, seeing understanding slowly replace the confusion and wounded pride that had characterized council attitudes toward humanity. Admiral Kytheros broke the silence. Captain Morrison, Dr. Grant, what would you recommend for restructuring council operations? Jake thought about it carefully. This was the moment that would define humanity's relationship with the galaxy for centuries to come. Equal representation in all council committees regardless of technological level. Mandatory review of all threat assessments by species from different developmental backgrounds. And most importantly, a formal protocol requiring the council to take seriously any extinction-level warnings, no matter who makes them. You're asking us to give a species that has been in space for 2 centuries equal say in decisions that affect civilizations thousands of years old, Quindril said. But his tone wasn't dismissive this time. It was genuinely curious. I'm asking you to survive, Jake said simply. The next threat might not be something humanity recognizes. It might be something the Altarians understand, or the Kepler colonists, or some species we haven't even made contact with yet. But if you only listen to the oldest, most advanced voices, you'll miss it. Lisa pulled up another display showing the entropy generator deployment. Look at what happened with the Devourers. Every single successful deployment was carried out by human crews using human strategies. Not because we're superior, but because we approached the problem differently. How? Asked the Morphic representative. We didn't try to destroy them or fight them. We tried to understand what they needed and find a way to give it to them without losing what we needed. It's a survival strategy that comes from being the weaker party in most conflicts. Jake smiled slightly. In other words, we succeeded because we're primitive. We don't have enough firepower to solve problems by force, so we've learned to solve them by thinking. The chamber erupted in conversations as different species discussed what they had heard. Jake watched alien beings debate concepts that would reshape galactic civilization, and he realized something important had changed. They weren't talking to humanity anymore. They were talking with humanity. Veltaran called for order. The council will recess to consider these proposals. We will reconvene in 3 days to vote on the new protocols. As the session ended, Jake found himself surrounded by alien beings asking questions, offering thanks, or simply wanting to understand how humanity had accomplished what their greatest civilizations could not. Admiral Kytheros approached him directly. "Captain Morrison, I owe you a personal apology. I called your warnings paranoid and primitive." Jake shook the Admiral's crystal hand, feeling the strange electric tingle of Zentaran physiology. "Admiral, if I'd been in your position, I might have done the same thing. The important thing is that we learned from it." "Learned what exactly?" Jake looked around the chamber at the hundreds of species trying to rebuild their civilization, after nearly losing it completely. That survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about being willing to listen to ideas that make you uncomfortable, especially when they come from people you don't expect to have answers. The Galactic Council had learned the hardest lesson in the universe, that wisdom could come from anywhere, and pride was a luxury that civilizations could not afford. The galaxy would be safer for it. 6 months after the Devourer crisis ended, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of humanity's newest space station, watching construction crews put the finishing touches on the Galactic Defense Initiative headquarters. The massive structure orbited between Earth and Luna, a symbol of how much the galaxy had changed since that first warning the Council had dismissed. Through the reinforced windows, Jake could see ships from dozens of species working together. Velcaron crystal vessels moved in formation with human destroyers, while Eschatar fighters practiced maneuvers alongside Altarian scouts. The sight still amazed him sometimes. 3 years ago, most of these species had barely acknowledged humanity existed. "The morning briefing is ready, Director," said Commander Amy Rodriguez, walking up behind him. She wore the new GDI uniform, a design that incorporated elements from major council species while maintaining human military traditions. Jake smiled at the title, Director of the Galactic Defense Initiative. 6 months ago, he had been a ship captain trying to convince aliens that ancient monsters were real. Now he was responsible for coordinating threat assessment across 300 different species. The briefing room filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Some attended in person, others appeared as holograms, and a few participated through methods Jake still didn't fully understand, but they were all there. And more importantly, they were all listening. "Current threat assessment stands at Code Green," reported Dr. Lisa Grant from her position at the main console. As Director of Xenobiological Research, she had access to sensor networks that spanned the entire galaxy. "No major extinction-level events detected, but we have several items requiring attention." Jake activated the holographic display. The Devourer entities remain stable in their current positions. All 12 entropy generators are functioning normally, and the creatures show no signs of resuming their advance toward populated systems. Admiral Kytheros, now serving as military liaison, provided the next update. "Refugee resettlement is proceeding ahead of schedule. 78% of displaced populations have returned to their homeworlds or established new colonies. The Altarian reconstruction effort reports they'll have their primary cities operational within 2 years. The success of the resettlement program had surprised everyone. Species that had lost their entire civilizations were rebuilding faster than anyone had predicted, and they were doing it with help from neighbors they had barely spoken to before the crisis. "What about the new protocols?" Jake asked. Veltaran, attending via hologram from Zentara Prime, answered, "The Inclusive Assessment Protocol is now operational in all Council systems. Any species detecting potential threats can trigger immediate review by a mixed committee. We've processed 43 reports in the past month." Jake nodded. Most of those reports had turned out to be false alarms, but 3 had identified genuine problems early enough to prevent disasters. a rogue asteroid heading toward a colony world, a stellar flare that would have disrupted communications across an entire sector, and a malfunctioning terraforming device that could have poisoned an ocean. Any species showing resistance to the new structure? Amy asked. Quindrill's hologram flickered as he joined the conversation. Some of the older civilizations still find it difficult to accept input from younger species. But the practical benefits are becoming obvious even to the most traditional groups. That was an understatement Jake knew. The new system had prevented more disasters in 6 months than the old council had addressed in decades. When every species felt their concerns would be heard seriously, they were much more willing to report potential problems early. What about the Deep Space Monitoring Project? Lisa asked. Jake pulled up the next set of displays. Project Watchman is ahead of schedule. We now have early warning sensor networks covering 60% of the galaxy's edge. The remaining installations should be complete within 18 months. The monitoring network was humanity's idea, based on the simple principle that threats were easier to handle if you saw them coming. Instead of massive battle stations that could be overwhelmed by superior force, they had built small, automated sensors that could detect unusual activity and transmit warnings instantly across the galaxy. The most interesting development, Amy said, is the volunteer program. She was right about that. When the GDI had announced they needed crews willing to investigate potential threats in unexplored regions, Jake had expected a few hundred applications from the most adventurous species. Instead, they had received over 10,000 volunteers representing every major civilization in the galaxy. The diversity is remarkable, Velteran observed. Mixed crews with species that had never worked together before are reporting better performance than single-species teams. Jake had seen the reports. Human intuition combined with Velcaran analytical abilities and Eschatar tactical instincts was creating exploration teams more effective than anyone had imagined possible. They were finding things in deep space that no single species would have detected alone. Admiral Ketheros leaned forward. Director Morrison, there's something else we need to discuss. The Outer Rim Colonial Association has formally requested GDI protection for their expansion into the Spiral Arm territories. Jake studied the data that appeared on his screen. The Outer Rim colonies were settlements established by species fleeing the Devourer crisis. Many had never planned to venture so far from their homeworlds, but the experience had taught them that the galaxy was full of opportunities for those brave enough to explore. What kind of protection are they requesting? Standard threat assessment and early warning coverage, Amy replied, plus emergency response capability if they encounter something beyond their ability to handle. Lisa looked up from her console. The Spiral Arm territories are completely unexplored. We have no idea what's out there. That's exactly why they want protection, Quindrill said. The colonies learned from the Devourer crisis that unknown doesn't have to mean dangerous, but it pays to be prepared. Jake made his decision. Approved. Extend Watchman sensor coverage to include the Spiral Arm expansion routes, and assign Explorer Teams 7 through 12 to provide support. It was the kind of decision that would have taken the old council months of debate. Under the new system, with proper threat assessment protocols and diverse input, it could be made immediately. Any other business? Admiral Ketheros cleared his throat, which created an odd chiming sound with his crystal physiology. Actually, yes. The council has voted to offer humanity full core membership status. Jake blinked. Core membership meant equal status with the galaxy's oldest civilizations. It meant humanity would have permanent seats on all major committees, equal voting rights on galactic policy, and access to technologies that had previously been restricted to species with thousands of years of spacefaring experience. That's significant, he said finally. Veltaran's hologram smiled, an expression Jake had learned to recognize despite the alien facial structure. Captain Morrison, your species has earned it. You've shown us that leadership isn't about age or technological advancement. It's about wisdom, courage, and the ability to see solutions that others miss. Amy grinned. Does this mean we finally get to see inside those Zentaran crystal cities everyone talks about? Dr. Rodriguez, you'll have access to everything, Ketheros said. Full technological exchange, cultural programs, even military cooperation if you want it. Jake looked around the room at beings from species that had once seen humanity as primitive newcomers. Now they were partners, colleagues, friends. The change was so dramatic it still surprised him sometimes. There's one more thing, Lisa said quietly. Something I've been working on with the Temporal Research Division. Everyone turned to look at her. Jake raised an eyebrow. Temporal research? We've been analyzing the Devourer encounter data, trying to understand the knowledge they shared with Commander Rodriguez and the other contact teams. Some of it relates to their ability to perceive time differently than we do. Amy leaned forward. What did you find? Lisa's expression grew serious. The entities showed us images of their previous passage through this galaxy, 50,000 years ago. But they also showed us glimpses of their next passage, which won't happen for another 200,000 years. The room fell silent. Jake felt a chill running down his spine. What did they show you about the next passage? A galaxy where hundreds of species work together, sharing knowledge and resources across thousands of star systems. Advanced civilizations that have learned to coexist with natural forces instead of fighting them, and at the center of it all, acting as coordinators and peacekeepers. She paused, looking around the room at the mixed group of humans and aliens working together. Us. All of us. The alliance we've built in response to the Devourer crisis becomes the foundation for a galactic civilization that lasts for hundreds of thousands of years. Jake sat back in his chair, trying to process what Lisa was saying. You're telling me that our response to this crisis created a timeline where the galaxy develops into something unprecedented? Not just unprecedented, Veltaran said softly. Eternal. The Devourers exist partly outside normal time. What they showed us wasn't just one possible future. It was the future that results from the choices we made during the crisis. Amy shook her head in amazement. So bone year after the Devourer crisis ended, Jake Morrison sat in his office aboard the GDI headquarters, reading the final report on galactic reconstruction. The numbers were better than anyone had dared hope. Every system that had been evacuated was now reoccupied. Most of the refugee populations had not only returned home but had expanded their settlements beyond pre-crisis levels, but the real changes went deeper than population statistics. Dr. Lisa. Grant knocked on his office door and entered. Without waiting for permission, something that would have been unthinkable in the old council protocols. Jake, you need to see this. She activated the holographic display and showed him a map of the galaxy. Instead of the old territorial boundaries that had separated different species for millennia, the map now showed something entirely different. Integrated zones where multiple species had chosen to build mixed communities. The Altarians and Velkarans have established joint colonies in the Spiral Arm region, Lisa explained. The SS Qatar are working with 3 different aquatic species to develop underwater cities. Even the Ethereals have formed partnerships with solid matter species to create hybrid research stations. Jake studied the display. How many mixed colonies are we talking about? Over 200, with more being planned every month. And Jake, these aren't just temporary cooperation projects. We're seeing interspecies marriages, joint business ventures, even new art forms that combine different species' creative traditions. Before Jake could respond, his communication system chimed with an incoming call from the council chambers. Veltaran's face appeared on the screen, his crystal features brighter than Jake had ever seen them. Director Morrison, could you and Dr. Grant join us for an emergency session? Something remarkable has happened. 20 minutes later, Jake and Lisa stood in the council chamber alongside representatives from dozens of species. But unlike the tense, formal gatherings of the past, this felt more like a celebration. Admiral Kytheros stood at the center of the chamber, his scarred crystal body reflecting light in patterns that indicated excitement. Members of the Galactic Defense Initiative, we have received first contact from an entirely unknown civilization. Jake felt his pulse quicken. Where? The Magellanic Cloud, Kytheros replied. A species calling themselves the Navigators has been observing our response to the Devourer crisis. They've decided to make formal contact. The main display activated, showing the image of a being unlike any Jake had ever seen. It looked like it was made of liquid starlight, constantly shifting and flowing while maintaining a roughly humanoid shape. Greetings, members of the Galactic Alliance, the being said in a voice that sounded like music made from mathematics. I am Navigator Prime Stellan. We have watched your species work together to resolve the entropy crisis, and we are impressed. Veltaran stepped forward. Welcome, Navigator Prime. We are honored by your contact. What brings you to our galaxy? Stellan's form shifted, showing what appeared to be star charts. We are an ancient species that has traveled between galaxies for millions of years. In all our journeys, we have never seen a civilization respond to the Devourers the way yours did. Jake felt a chill of recognition. You've encountered them before? Many times across many galaxies. Usually, civilizations try to fight the entropy entities with force. They build larger weapons, stronger shields, more powerful fleets. They always fail and their galaxies are consumed completely. Lisa stepped forward. But our approach was different? Stellan's form brightened. Dr. Grant, your species did something we have never witnessed. Instead of fighting entropy, you embraced it. You found a way to satisfy the entity's needs while preserving complex life. It was elegant. Admiral Kitharos spoke up. Navigator Prime, are you saying that other galaxies have been completely destroyed by these entities? 17 galaxies that we know of. Billions of species, trillions of individual lives, all converted to base energy. Your galaxy is the first to survive a full Devourer passage intact. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Jake looked around at the alien faces surrounding him, seeing the same awe and responsibility he felt. They hadn't just saved their own civilization. They had accomplished something unprecedented in the universe. There's more, Stellan continued. The solution you developed, these entropy generators, they work. We've been testing similar devices in other regions where Devourer entities roam. The results are remarkable. The star charts shifted, showing vast intergalactic spaces where points of light indicated active entropy generators. Your innovation has the potential to save not just galaxies, but entire galactic clusters. The entities can be fed indefinitely without requiring the destruction of complex civilizations. Jake found his voice. What are you asking of us? Stellan's form stabilized into something almost human-like. Partnership. The navigators have knowledge of threats that exist beyond your current understanding. Entities that make the Devourers seem simple by comparison. But we lack something crucial that your alliance possesses. Which is, Feltaran asked, the ability to unite different forms of consciousness into effective cooperation. Navigator Prime, in our millions of years of travel, we have become isolated, self-sufficient. We forgot how to work with others. Your alliance represents something we thought was impossible. Permanent cooperation between fundamentally different forms of life. Amy Rodriguez, who had been quietly listening from the human delegation, spoke up. You're offering to teach us about cosmic-level threats in exchange for learning how to work with other species? More than that, Commander. We're offering full membership in what your people might call a universal defense network. There are other galaxy-spanning civilizations out there, some friendly, others not so much. Your alliance has proven itself capable of handling threats that destroyed civilizations far older and more technologically advanced. Jake looked at the beings around him. Species that a year ago had dismissed humanity as primitive children. Now they were being invited to join a cosmic alliance that spanned multiple galaxies. Dr. Grant raised her hand. What would this partnership involve? Stellan's form shifted again, showing images of technologies beyond anything in their current databases. Complete knowledge exchange. Our understanding of cosmic phenomena. Your social integration techniques. Our navigation methods for intergalactic travel. Your conflict resolution protocols. And the other cosmic civilizations you mentioned? Kitharos asked. Some are benevolent but isolated like the navigators were. Others are aggressive expansionist cultures that consume galaxies through conquest, rather than entropy conversion. A few are simply incomprehensible, operating on principles of existence that most life forms cannot survive contact with. Jake made a decision that surprised even him. Navigator Prime Stellan, the Galactic Defense Initiative accepts your offer of partnership. But we have conditions. Stellan's form brightened with what appeared to be amusement. I would expect no less from the species that taught a galaxy to negotiate with entropy itself. What are your conditions? First, any knowledge or technology you share with us gets shared with all member species equally. No preferential treatment based on technological level or age of civilization. Agreed. Second, we maintain our current decision-making protocols. All major choices get reviewed by representatives from different developmental backgrounds. Understood. Jake took a deep breath. Third, humanity gets equal representation in any universal defense network, despite being the youngest spacefaring species involved. Stellan's musical laughter filled the chamber. Director Morrison, after what your species accomplished with the Devourers, I wouldn't dream of offering you anything less than equal partnership. As the formal agreements were being drafted, Jake found himself standing next to Velterran, watching species representatives work together to negotiate humanity's entry into a cosmic alliance. "Prime Advisor," Jake said quietly, "do you ever think about how different things would be if the Council had listened to our first warning?" Velterran's crystal body pulsed thoughtfully. "Often. But Jake, I've come to believe that things happened exactly as they needed to. If we had taken your warning seriously immediately, we might have tried to solve the problem with traditional military force. We probably would have failed, and the galaxy would have been consumed. You think our suffering was necessary? I think your species needed to prove not just that you were right, but that your approach was better than ours. If we had simply accepted your warnings, we would have learned nothing. Instead, we learned that wisdom comes from unexpected sources, that cooperation is stronger than competition, and that the newest voice in the room might have the most important things to say." Jake smiled. "So humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization was teaching everyone else to listen to uncomfortable truths? Among other things, you also taught us that survival sometimes requires putting aside pride, that strength isn't always about having the biggest weapons, and that the best solutions often come from understanding problems rather than fighting them." Across the chamber, Jake watched human technicians working alongside Velcaron scientists and Eschatar engineers to integrate